In 2008, a man in Phoenix bought a house for $340,000. He put down $0. The bank gave him 100% of the purchase price through a product called a no documentation loan, meaning the bank didn't verify his income, didn't require proof of assets, just approved the mortgage because home prices had been going up for a decade and everyone involved assumed they'd keep going up. Home prices stopped going up. The man owed $340,000 on a house worth $210,000. He walked away. The bank absorbed the loss. The bank had made thousands of similar loans, bundled them into securities, sold them to investors who didn't know what was inside them, and the whole architecture failed simultaneously across the American financial system. The 2008 financial crisis was, at its foundation, a leverage crisis. Not a housing crisis, not a banking crisis, a leverage crisis, meaning the systematic use of borrowed money at a scale that worked beautifully when prices rose and catastrophically when they didn't. Here's the thing about leverage that people either don't understand or understand too late. It doesn't change the direction of outcomes, it amplifies them. Leverage applied to a good investment makes a good investment great. Leverage applied to a bad investment makes a bad investment catastrophic. The tool doesn't care which one you're doing. It just multiplies. Every fortune in modern history was built with leverage. Every bankruptcy was too. Here's what it actually looks like at every level. Level 1, the first mortgage. You put down $40,000. The bank put in $320,000. You just used leverage for the first time without calling it that. The down payment is $40,000. The house costs $360,000. You have $40,000. The bank provides $320,000. You own the house. The bank owns a lien on the house. This is leverage. Specifically, 8-to-1 leverage. For every dollar of your own money, you control $8 of asset. If the house appreciates 10% in year 1, the value increases by $36,000. Your $40,000 investment just returned $36,000, a 90% return on your actual capital, not on the full price. The same math works in reverse. If the house drops 10%, the value decreases by $36,000. Your $40,000 equity is now $4,000. An 11% price drop wipes out your entire down payment. Most homeowners don't think about their mortgage as leverage. They think about it as the way you buy a house, which it is, and the psychological framing matters because thinking about it as leverage would require thinking about the downside scenarios that most people prefer not to think about when they're excited about buying a home. The leverage is working in your favor as long as the house appreciates faster than your interest costs. In most U.S. markets over most time periods, it has. That track record is why mortgages feel safe. Because the historical performance of the underlying asset, housing, has been strong enough that the leverage embedded in the transaction has been net positive for most buyers over most holding periods. But the leverage is always there. The 2008 man in Phoenix wasn't doing anything conceptually different from what you're doing. He was doing it with less equity buffer and a worse underlying asset trajectory. The margin of safety in leverage is always the gap between what you owe and what the asset is worth. Your margin is 11%. Be aware of it. Level 2. Credit card debt as leverage. This is leverage too, the worst kind. You're borrowing at 24% to buy things that depreciate immediately. The television was $1,200. You put it on the card because you had the card and the television was on sale and you'd pay it off next month. Next month came. You paid $200. The balance became $1,024 after interest. You paid another $200. The balance became $844. This is also leverage. It is leverage applied to a depreciating consumer asset at a 24.99% interest rate. The distinction between good leverage and bad leverage is not complex. Good leverage is borrowed money applied to assets that generate returns exceeding the cost of borrowing. Bad leverage is borrowed money applied to consumption or depreciating assets where the cost of borrowing exceeds any possible return. The television doesn't generate returns. The television is worth $800 the day after you buy it and $300 in 3 years. You are paying 24.99% annually to own something losing value while you're paying for it. The leverage is working perfectly against you. Credit card debt is the most common form of leverage in America and the least recognized as leverage. It doesn't feel like a financial instrument, it feels like a payment method. The distinction that costs people is that every balance carried forward is borrowed money at the highest retail interest rate in the financial system. $10,000 in credit card debt at 24.99% costs $2,499 per year in interest. That's $208 per month paid to own money you've already spent. Over 10 years of minimum payments, that $10,000 original purchase costs approximately $23,000 total. The leverage multiplied the cost of everything you bought by 2.3 times. The exit from bad leverage is not complicated. Stop adding to it. Apply every available dollar above minimums to the highest rate balance, and accept that the path out requires a period of directed austerity that feels worse than it is because you can see the light at the end. The people who carry credit card debt for decades are not irresponsible. They're people for whom the monthly minimum was the only available payment during a tight period, and the habit of minimum payments persisted after the tight period ended. Breaking the habit requires seeing the interest line on the statement not as a fee but as what it is: the cost of leverage applied in the wrong direction. Level 3. Margin investing. You borrow against your portfolio to buy more portfolio. The broker explains the upside, you learn the downside yourself. Your brokerage account holds $80,000. The broker offers margin, the ability to borrow against your existing portfolio to buy more securities, up to 50% of your portfolio value. You can borrow $40,000 against your $80,000 in holdings and invest a total of $120,000. If your portfolio returns 10%, $120,000 generates $12,000. The interest on $40,000 borrowed at 8% costs $3,200. Net gain, $8,800. On your original $80,000 were an 11% return versus 10% without leverage. The math is attractive. The math is also selective. If your portfolio drops 20%, not an extreme scenario, the S&P dropped 34% in 5 weeks in March 2020, your $120,000 position becomes $96,000. You still owe $40,000 to the broker plus interest. Your equity is now $56,000. You've lost $24,000 on an $80,000 portfolio. A 30% loss on your actual capital from a 20% market decline. Worse, the broker doesn't wait. When your position drops to the point where your equity falls below the broker's maintenance margin requirement, typically 25% of the position value, you receive a margin call. The broker requires you to either deposit additional cash immediately or they liquidate your positions to cover the loan. Margin calls happen at the worst possible time, during market declines when you'd most want to hold and wait for recovery, when cash is hardest to come by, when you're least emotionally equipped to make clear decisions. The leverage that worked when the market was rising forces selling at the bottom, permanently crystallizing losses that a cash investor could have waded through. This is why experienced investors describe margin as a tool that requires the market to always be in your favor to work. The moment it isn't, the leverage mechanism inverts and works against you with the same efficiency it previously worked for you. Most retail investors who use margin lose money on it. Not because margin is inherently unsuitable, but because the downside scenarios that are theoretically understood abstractly hit differently when it's your portfolio and the market is dropping 3% a day. Level 4. Real estate investment leverage. You buy a rental property with 20% down. The tenant pays the mortgage. You own the appreciating asset. The property costs $280,000. You put down $56,000, 20%. The bank provides $224,000 at 7%. Monthly mortgage payment, $1,490. You rent it for $2,100 per month. After property management fees, maintenance reserve, insurance, and taxes, the property cash flows roughly $300 per month. $300 a month sounds modest. It is modest as cash flow. What's not modest is the full picture. Every month your tenant pays rent, $1,490 of that rent goes toward the mortgage. Of that mortgage payment, some portion reduces the principal. Your equity increases. Year 1, approximately $2,800 in principal is paid down by your tenant. Year 10, that number is higher as the amortization schedule shifts. Meanwhile, the property is likely appreciating. At 4% annual appreciation on a $280,000 property, $11,200 per year in asset value growth. Your total return calculation in year 1, $3,600 cash flow plus $2,800 principal paydown plus $11,200 appreciation equals $17,600. On a $56,000 investment, a 31% return. This is the power of real estate leverage. You deployed $56,000, you control a $280,000 asset, and the returns are calculated on the full asset value while the equity required is a fraction. The risks are real and specific. Vacancy periods, maintenance surprises, difficult tenants, local market downturns. A property that sits vacant for 2 months doesn't generate $2,100 in rent, but still requires the $1,490 mortgage payment. A $15,000 roof replacement in year 3 changes the return calculation significantly. Real estate leverage works when the asset produces enough income to service the debt and appreciates faster than the cost of borrowing. When those conditions hold, which they do in most markets over most long holding periods, the returns on equity are exceptional. When they don't hold, the leverage creates the same problem it creates everywhere. You owe more than the asset produces or is worth. The professional real estate investors run their numbers conservatively, assuming higher vacancy rates, higher maintenance costs, and lower appreciation than the optimistic scenario. The amateur runs the optimistic scenario and discovers the conservative scenario lived in the building. Level 5. Business leverage. You borrow $500,000 to start a business. You're betting your financial life that the returns exceed the debt service. The SBA loan is approved at $500,000, interest rate 10.5%, monthly payment $6,700. You need the business to generate at least $6,700 in cash flow per month before you pay yourself anything, before you cover your operating expenses, before you have any margin for error. Business leverage is the most operationally complex form of leverage because the underlying assets, sure, the business, is not passive. It requires your time, your decisions, and your management. The mortgage on a rental property runs whether you pay attention to it or not. The business loan requires you to generate the returns that service it every month in a competitive environment that doesn't offer guarantees. The businesses that use debt effectively treat it as a growth accelerant, not a survival mechanism. You borrow to expand a proven operation, open a second location, buy equipment that increases production capacity, fund inventory for a contract you've already won. The debt is applied to a specific revenue opportunity with a defined return timeline. The businesses that use debt destructively borrow to stay alive or to make payroll when revenue is short, to fund operating losses hoping the next month will be better, to delay the reckoning of an operation that isn't working. Every month of borrowed survival is borrowed time. The interest accumulates, the principal remains. The underlying problem that required borrowing for survival usually doesn't resolve because survival borrowing doesn't fix business model problems. The mental model that separates effective business leverage from destructive business leverage. Does this debt create a specific asset or revenue stream that services the debt from its own returns? If yes, the leverage has a case. If the debt is funding operations without a clear path to the specific returns that service it, the leverage is compressing the timeline to a problem rather than solving one. Most failed businesses didn't fail because they borrowed too much. They failed because they borrowed for the wrong reasons, and the leverage accelerated a trajectory that was already wrong. Level 6. Corporate leverage. Private equity buys the company you work for. They put $30 million in equity and $120 million in debt. The math is elegant. You're going to feel the math. The announcement comes on a Thursday. A private equity firm has acquired the company. The press release uses words like exciting partnership and growth opportunity and significant investment. What the press release doesn't say, because press releases don't say this, the firm put in $30 million of their own capital and borrowed $120 million to complete the $150 million purchase. The company's own cash flow will service the $120 million in debt. This structure is a leveraged buyout. The firm used the company's balance sheet to fund the company's purchase. The debt that now sits on the company's books didn't exist before the acquisition. It exists so the private equity firm could acquire a $150 million company with $30 million in actual capital. When it works, the company's cash flow comfortably services the debt. The PE firm implements operational improvements that increase EBITDA. The company is sold 5 years later at a higher multiple. The $30 million equity investment becomes $90 million. Everyone wins, including employees who received equity participation. When it doesn't work, the debt service consumes cash flow that would have funded operations, growth, and compensation. The company is forced into cost-cutting not because the business is struggling, but because the debt structure requires margin improvement to service the leverage. The most common cost-cutting measure, labor. Your position is a spreadsheet line item. Not maliciously, structurally. The people making decisions about your role are making decisions about cost structures against debt service requirements, and the human texture of those decisions, who you are, what you do, what your departure would mean, is genuinely secondary to whether the numbers work. The leverage that let the firm buy a $150 million company with $30 million is the same leverage that turns your job security into a variable in a return optimization equation. This is not a conspiracy. This is how leveraged capital allocation operates when the leverage is applied to an operating business with human beings in it. If this changed how you think about borrowed money, subscribe. More of these coming. And if you've been on the wrong side of leverage and made it through, drop a comment. That story matters more than the theory.